Tim Salisbury, good morning and welcome to the lockdown sessions. I'm glad we're in here because I kept you waiting in the waiting room for 10 minutes, so not a great start.
You're forgiven. And hi, Brad, and thanks for inviting me to do this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So, Tim, you've worked as an exec coach for 20 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
You and I have been working on the last couple of years on coaching programs across sort of Europe and APAC.
Yep.
And I thought it would be really interesting to come together and bring our perspectives on leaders, what the future holds for leaders after lockdown, because we're slowly coming out of it, however strange it seems and how messy it might be. And I thought, what a good opportunity to sit down based on your client experience and kind of get a feel for what are you observing, what are you noticing, what are you hearing and seeing in our space, which is leadership and coaching. So I always start with the same question every time. So I'm going to throw that at you and we can riff from there. What have you observed over the last 100 plus days as we shut down?
Yeah, okay. I suppose what I've observed is that some people have been incredibly busy, like, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and weekends. And other people have had a real opportunity to slow down and spend time with their family and have loved it. And there doesn't seem to be much of a middle ground, actually, in that. So I know my partner, Nikki, who's working upstairs at the moment, has just been flat out, unbelievably flat out, far more than usual. And so that's been quite interesting to watch that. What have I observed? That that friends and family are really important, and get you through this. I love my cleaner because I had to clean the house myself on a Saturday morning. It was the biggest drag of all. So thankfully she's back, and I love her dearly. But I think most of all that, what I've learned is that people are, it's reinforced really, that I think just people are adaptable and flexible, they get put in a situation and, we find different ways of coping. Some obviously cope better than others, but, I think we've all responded pretty well to it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you don't know you're resilient until you have to be resilient. And I think it's a typically British thing as well. I'm not trying to be jingoistic, but, the stiff upper lip.
Yeah.
And it was, just get on with it. Now I think we're in this kind of non-compliant stage where...
Yeah, there's a bit of rebellion coming. And I get it, everyone was complaining about all those people invading Bournemouth the other week. But, I guess if you've been stuck in a high-rise tower block with two or three kids for a couple of months, you're going to do anything, aren't you? So,
Yeah, you live in a house, so you have a garden. Yeah. And like me, lockdown wasn't that challenging from that regard.
No.
And I was running webinars with people on it, where you had a guy in France who was working from home, his wife was working from home, the two kids were homeschooling, they lived in an apartment, no balcony, no garden, and not enough Wi-Fi bandwidth for two adults to work and two kids to homeschool. Yeah. They were pulling their hair out.
Yeah.
That was on week 2, by the way. I mean, by week 16, they were absolutely going mad. From the perspective, though, of, and I like when you say about how, some people have been really busy, some people haven't. And I think that's true, right? Depending on which industry you're in. But for those people now, as we kind of look forward, especially from a leadership perspective, they're having to create an environment where people want to come back to work. I know we were talking a little bit earlier, but the whole world went digital in the last couple of months. And by that, I don't mean that we weren't before, but suddenly video conferencing is in everyone's domain. And I know that corporates I work with have acknowledged that office space isn't the most important thing. And I joked on a podcast a couple of weeks ago with William, who we've worked with on coaching programs. I said, I wouldn't want to be in commercial property right now. I'm not sure that's a great business to be in. But what do you observe when you look out at your clients and your learning, when you think of this new digital space that everybody's got quite comfortable in now? Is it going to change the landscape for leaders, the fact that now everyone is so okay with delivering virtually?
I think it must do. I mean, obviously, not everyone wants to go back, and there are some people who will still have, really embraced this. But I think there are a lot of people who will want to go back. I know, I mentioned my partner Nikki, but a couple of her, girls who work for her have been literally working on their bed, for the past umpteen weeks, because they share a house and it's the only space they've got, and that's not good for anybody's mental health. So definitely people will want to go back. And I guess from a leader's perspective, looking forward, that it's really important that we recognize a duty of care, towards our people, both from a physical and mental health point of view, far more than we ever used to have to think about that, really. I think that's going to be a key responsibility of a leader going forward.
They talk about psychological safety, don't they? And I think that's becoming now a really critical piece of the jigsaw. And in one way, it kind of makes me smile, because I don't think ever before have HR departments been so important.
Yeah.
When it all kicked off, they were writing furlough policies, and suddenly everyone was talking to HR, getting people working from home. I wonder now, coming back, and you've kind of referenced this, maybe, the world of leadership, senior leadership, C-level, CEO level, maybe that's changing as well, because the domain has opened up now, where tech guys are actually just as valid as someone coming in from a sales or ops perspective.
No, absolutely. In fact, a couple of weeks back, I listened to a webinar, and a chap called Steve Brown, who's a futurist, and he used to work for Intel. He was their futurist. But he was making some really interesting comments that, we're going to see probably what would normally take 10 years in terms of development. It's going to happen in about 5 years now, and that, technology is going to be driving all of this. And that, as you just implied there, that typically in the past, leaders or CEOs have typically got there via a finance background, sales, marketing. But, the whole digital transformation is such that you could easily now see CTOs, CIOs becoming the CEO. It's a very valid route.
And actually, I suppose that one of the things for me that I've observed is how comfortable people now have got with turning their videos on. And we ran a session overnight, actually, for our Asia program that we work on, the APAC coaching program. So we had a kick-off training session. So here in the UK, it was like 3 a.m. till 9 a.m., which was a little challenging 2 days running. But everybody had their video on. And when I think back to last year, when we ran a webinar for the same group, less than half had their video on.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if, because the only way to communicate for the last 4 months has been like this, my sense is that now leaders have got a real question to ask. Do I need those people in? So you talked about some of the people, the women who work for Nikki. I think in some jobs, even particularly in sales jobs, I don't know if those people need to go back in. I wonder if leaders have to adapt their approach, goal setting. I mean, when you think about, say, the leaders that you train on the MBA course, will you need to change some of the content and perspectives of that moving forward now that we live in such a different place?
Yeah, I don't know that that's possible, actually. So London Business School have been really busy embracing this whole digital scene, and professors are not traditionally into that. They like to stand up, do their lectures, based on their own particular pet subjects, and that's it. But even they've had to embrace it. But they have been really busy rewriting elements of the MBA programs, and you know, so that will come through more in the iterations that start this summer and autumn. So I can't really comment on that particular piece, but I mean, they've already got modules in there around, you know, the future of digital organizations and so on, you know, so that they have already embraced that. But yeah, I think there's, I mean, alongside all of that, you know, there's a whole trusting piece as well, where, you know, I guess, you know, in a crisis, it's a leader's first thing is to try and get their hands around it and control and really micromanage. And yet actually, you know, I think practice is showing that you've got to do the reverse of that and just really empower people and trust them to get on and deliver. You know, so the salesman will still make his calls, do visits as and when, you know, breathing down someone's neck in this environment doesn't particularly help. So I think there's a real piece there about leaders having to really trust and empower, and and just be adaptable to the circumstances. It's all about the adaptable organization, being agile. These are all the words we're hearing. Pivot is a word that,
oh gosh,
until a couple of months back, you know, never heard it used in this context. Now everybody's pivoting.
Yeah. Well, I smile. I've tried not to use the word pivot or unprecedented over the last 4 months, and I got a little bit annoyed when I received an email from someone the other day who was asking me how was I pivoting.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write back something that I didn't. I was far more controlled, because I don't see it as a pivot so much. I see it as actually looking at it's a slightly new value proposition everybody's having to offer. I don't feel the need to pivot, because pivot suggests I'm leaning towards something. So when I pivot on one leg. I think of it in a sports context as an ex-football coach. You know, and I'd lean on my right foot and then shoot off on my left. So I pivot to move on. And I don't know if people feel like they can pivot so well. But from a leadership point of view, the pivot or something, I was talking with someone else who said to me, they view it as what they called a leadershift rather than leadership. And I quite like this idea that it's a shift rather than a pivot. So it's just moving into something. It's leaning into something. And I like what you're saying about the trust and sort of almost giving away the control, because you have to focus on what gets done, not how it gets done.
Yeah.
And if you were calling me every couple of hours to see how I am, I'm just going to think you're checking up on me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. There's something about being, I guess, to use an acting analogy, but, you know, being front stage and backstage. I think, you know, the leader will have to kind of play both roles, and there'll be a need to be front stage, which is all the, you know, the communication, the vision, inspiring people, etc., and then move backstage, which is really just that support and, you know, obviously making sure things are happening, but letting people come to the fore and do their thing.
When if you go back sort of 10 or 11 years to the last time we were working during a recession, are there lessons there for coaches like us, for leaders that we work with, of how to recover from a business perspective, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that was a very different recession, though, wasn't it? In as much as, you know, it was the banking crisis, budgets were immediately cut. So the impact on us coaches and trainers was, you know, really... well, I haven't noticed this. I mean, funny enough, in the first couple of weeks, my diary just evaporated.
Right.
And then I got a call out of the blue from a contact within, well, a major government department, asking if I'd look to almost like man a helpline, because their staff were working 7 till 7, weekends, etc. On the whole COVID and the financial response. And cut long story short, I did that for 3 months. It finished at the end of June. And I was just literally there on the end of the phone, just being an outlet for people to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. So that kind of rescued me. And during that period, other stuff has come back now, other coaching requirements. So I'm not seeing it in quite the same way, you know?
Yeah.
And I hope that all these, you know, the economists are saying we're coming out in a kind of a V-shape or maybe a U-shaped recession. I just hope that happens. But I think it is a different type of recession anyway.
I think everyone cancelled diaries because there was so much to do to get people to work from home.
Yeah.
And no one had the capacity to think about a training day or a coaching workshop. I noticed the same as you. Within a couple of weeks of the diary evaporating, actually the diary became really full. And the last 4 months have been busy with webinars and converting workshops to online virtuals. So it hasn't actually changed at all. I was looking forward to 3 months with the family, chilling at home. But no, 7 o'clock starts are still there in the cabin at the back of the garden. And I'm fighting for my place on the running machine at the end of the day, which is great. So I'm not saying it from a complaining point of view. But what I do notice, and maybe this is where I'd love your opinion, do you feel as though there's a need for organizations to maybe leverage training and coaches even more now? You talked before about leaders needing to be that kind of psychological safe space. They're not trained in that, Tim. You just manned a helpline for 3 months because you're an experienced coach who could give people the safe space to come and talk about whatever it was, and you can answer questions and reflect back what you're hearing. Not all leaders can do that when they're command and control, get things done, results orientation. What about my stakeholders, my shareholders? They live in a different space to us. I've always felt privileged as a coach. I come in and everything's calm and relaxed when I walk in the room. But these guys they're leaving that coaching session and they're going to report to the shareholders about, you know, what business looks like.
Yeah.
Is there maybe more of a need even now for coaching leaders?
I definitely think so. I think, you know, that whole empathy, emotional intelligence piece, you know, I mean, it was vitally important before, but I do think it's going to come up another level now. You know, I think, you know, when you look at society, a lot of society has been, one of the things that's come through this lockdown is people being a little bit more considerate of each other and, you know, kind. And I think that people will expect that to continue. I hope so anyway, you know. And I think leaders need to really embrace that. And you're right, not every leader has that particular skill in their toolkit. So I think there will definitely be a demand for that, you know, in us helping them make some of those transitions. But yeah, cultures within companies definitely going to be changing as well.
I think they are already. I think they've changed now, like dramatically. And because of the fact that people are nervous to go back and not everyone needs to or wants to, I think that ability to recreate the culture of an organization is perhaps going to be one of the biggest challenges. I know for leaders I'm coaching, I'm having lots of conversations around their fears over the next few months.
Yeah.
And their fears, the themes that are coming back are culture. What's going to happen to the culture of the team? Sales teams who have spent 3 months not visiting clients and customers, not being able to shake hands over a deal. I mean, in the Emirates where I do some work, they're going mad.
Yeah.
Because they only do business face to face.
Yeah.
You shake hands first, you look them in the eye, and then you talk business when you're having a drink. And they are literally going spare because they can't get to see customers, they can't shake hands. And I wonder whether there's a culture gap now where companies will almost be grieving for the loss of their culture.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought about it. I mean, there's the old bereavement curve, isn't there? So, I mean, let's face it, a culture, an organizational culture is only a total of, human behavior, values and beliefs, etc. So, yeah, I guess that's going to pretty much happen. And how do you recreate that? I suppose that's a really interesting. How do you recreate that digitally when people aren't together all the time? Yeah.
So here's a question for you. I wonder what you think. So I was chatting with a leader the other day, and I asked him how many team meetings had he had over the course of the last 3 months. They were meeting twice a week as a team, a group of 9 sales guys. But they work in a matrix organization. So these guys are all talking to other parts of the business. Partners, other stakeholders, customers, suppliers, vendors. I mean, really, they're talking to everybody. And I said to him, how often do you talk to other teams in the region? And they don't.
Wow.
So they're totally teamed out on their team meetings. But when he started to think about his people in his team, there was no way, nothing had been laid out for cross-functional team dynamics. You know, those ad hoc conversations you might have when you're queuing for the lift.
Yeah.
Or you're stood in reception waiting for a parcel. Yeah. Right, exactly. I don't know how you recreate that. That's the bit for me that I'm really struggling to think, and we struggled in this coaching session, didn't come up with an answer. How do we recreate the cross-functional stuff? Because teams can communicate. Yeah. I mean, the platforms are so savvy now with breakout rooms and polls. You can actually have real fun, jam boards and things like this.
Yeah.
I wonder what happens. So for me, the culture of the organization is the cross-functional, the cross-regional stuff, not just the team-based stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, actually. Yeah, I mean, short of, well, cooperation and collaboration, of course, are, going to be key things going forward. But so, how do you start making that happen? How do you get leaders to start looking outside of their immediate domain in order to do that? And I was just reflecting back, talking about office space. I mean, all those companies like Facebook and Microsoft designed all those properties so that people could bump into each other.
Right, totally open plan spaces.
Yeah. Whereas now we're going to have to start putting the barriers up. So, physically. So how do we therefore, metaphorically, take those barriers down?
Right, because we go back to a kind of 1980s style. Everyone's got their own cubicle.
Yeah.
And I read a couple of weeks ago, Zuckerberg's already emailed the entire business and said, if you don't want to come back, work virtually.
Yeah.
And they've got, $17 million offices and that they just refurbed.
Yeah, I know. I think there'll be a big boom in social housing, though. All those office blocks in London could easily be recreated in terms of accommodation.
Well, I would be totally for that. I've always felt that there's so much unused office space in London easily at the moment now.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, with all those businesses also going out of business, I've not been into London town.
No, nor have I. No.
But I'm sure that a number of shops along Oxford Street and the surrounding areas have probably lost their tenants because there's been no footfall for 3 months.
No, exactly. I mean, the other side of that as well is, in terms of Amazon, Facebook, I think I remember reading that. And of course, the other thing, though, that it does is it opens up a global talent pool, because you could argue it was there before, but, people, when they go in the office, so you have to normally live nearby, but now you don't need to. So, that's going to be quite interesting as well. And how companies embrace that and look for talent.
Well, actually, it's funny that you say that, because I've just started work with a new client. I literally have had one session and a chemistry call. He's a CEO of a startup out in Silicon Valley. The chemistry conversation was him walking from his house to the office with him holding the phone with the beautiful blue sky in the background, and all I could see as he was walking past were convertible cars.
Oh, really? Oh, my gosh.
Literally along the street. Every car was a convertible with the roof down. I even commented on it. And he's from Eastern Europe. He's gone out to Silicon Valley as this startup. And they're trying to create a $100 million business in 3 years. Very adventurous. And he's just promoted this idea of global talent where he's now not insisting. Even though they're a startup only in year 2, he's not insisting that everyone comes to Silicon Valley to live. He's actually saying, if you can code, you can work from your room wherever it is, as long as you've got a little video window open all day long, where if we want to have those touch points and chats, we can have a little conversation.
Yeah, interesting.
And it's totally opened up, because not everybody wants to move to Silicon Valley.
No.
In his world. I said to him that when he does sell the business for 100 million and buys his ranch, could he invite me out for the celebratory party?
I'm surprised you didn't build in a little 10% fee.
I should have asked for a little bit of a kickback. I don't know how ethical that would have been. I might edit that bit out, actually, Tim.
No, sorry.
Tell me then, when you look forward, do you have your own reservations as a coach and a leadership facilitator when you think about the future of business?
No, is the immediate response. And why is that? Because I think, things will, despite all the changes we're talking about, they will return to a normal, in inverted commas. And ultimately, humans like humans, and we need to interact with each other. And so I think there will be some kind of coming together, and the new normal, whatever that is, will start to come into play. But no, I think, even if all those companies that have potentially gone bust, again, people have an entrepreneurial spirit, there will be other startups coming. So I think, over a period of time, it will come back to some kind of normality, for sure. Yeah.
I suppose the challenge for us as kind of business owners, small business owners, is maintaining those relationships. Or that's what I felt has been key. So although not every client came back to say, yes, let's do some virtual work, I found it really valuable to use that time to just keep in touch with them and have ad hoc calls. And that seems to have sort of helped keep maintaining that level. From a coaching point of view, do you see any other challenges that leaders should be thinking about? I like what you were talking about, the kind of the futuristic way, CIOs and CTOs having more of a say maybe in the strategic direction of a business, even lending itself to CEO level roles. I wonder, as a coach and a leadership coach, are there other areas we should be thinking about for leaders to sort of help them move into this new phase of whatever normal is going to look like?
Yeah, but there's probably going to be a real big demand on digital transformation courses anyway. So I'm sure that a lot of leaders now are going to start embracing this, because I suppose typically at the top, I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't have, or we couldn't have worked like this in the past, but it was typically the people towards the top of the organization, the senior management, who didn't like that. They liked to meet in the boardroom and have all the top team on the same floor and that kind of thing. So, maybe now those ties have been loosened, they'll be, happier to embrace some of this stuff as well. And what else would there be that leaders would need to? I think just embracing, in terms of supply chains and various other operational channels, product channels, etc. They're going to have to be looking at all of this stuff, you know, from 5G to artificial intelligence to augmented reality and, you know, various, the Internet of Things, and how it can all just link, and, you know, they can bring it or incorporate it into the way in which they operate for the benefit of ultimately, you know, the customers. We've all got used to not going down the high street, you know, and it's looking online and everything, you know, so it's, yeah.
I haven't been into a supermarket now for 4 months.
Yeah.
And I find that my shopping bill is less because I'm not...
yeah. Not just randomly picking things off the shelf, yeah.
I was like, oh, that would be nice.
Yeah.
So I do miss that, but I also miss just eating a bunch of grapes as I walk around the supermarket shopping, and then giving the cashier this empty bag and say, yeah, could you put that through as well?
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I know, I do, you know, I think that is an interesting, you know, thing for the future, and how that not only impacts on the, I guess, on the end user, the, you know, the client, but also how it can, you know, with the employees as well, and what role all of that artificial intelligence starts to play in terms of, you know, the type of roles that those people will do.
And I think there's then a direct link from that to kind of a more deeper inclusivity about the way businesses operate, and therefore from a leadership point of view, I think becoming a more inclusive leader, which is referring to your point from earlier today, it becomes more important. Leaders need to think about not just themselves, the team, the operation, but it's about how do I value all these diverse skills when I'm disparate and remote. And I think inclusivity, we're going to see D&I probably taking more of a front center stage view, because leaders can't afford to just be doing things in the old way. I'm not convinced we want to just snap back into how it was anyway.
No.
My sense is that people are open enough to realize that now we need to do things differently again. It's a shift.
Yeah, definitely. I know of one major bank, major retail bank, where, you know, the CEO and the key people have, you know, been told quite forcefully that they're not allowed back in the building, and that they must work from home in order to set the example for everyone else. So, and they've adhered to it, as far as I'm aware. So, yeah.
I like the thought of that. I'll ask you one more question, because it feels as though we've kind of come full circle from starting out with pivoting and the idea of sort of the digital world to kind of this digital transformation that you talk about. What are your hopes as a coach and a leadership expert as you look forward, say, over the next 3 to 6 months?
What are my hopes? My hopes are that we continue to be kind and compassionate to each other. And there's that, you know, it's quite a well-known kind of phrase now, isn't it? But it's about, you know, good leadership and leadership for good. And I hope that really comes to the fore in terms of all of that means, actually, which is also around, I mean, the whole sustainability and climate impact as well. So I think, you know, with leaders, there's a really broad spectrum of things now that need to be taken into account. But I think, for me, that phrase probably encapsulates the direction we should be moving in.
You may have found the title of the podcast episode. Good leadership and leadership for good.
Good. Yeah.
Brilliant. Tim Salisbury, thank you so much for your time today. That was brilliant. Will you come back in a couple of months and we'll reflect back to see how good our ideas were and whether or not they actually came to fruition, or whether we were talking nonsense and all our leaders should just stop talking to us?
Yeah, I'd love to. That would be great, Brad. Thank you.
Brilliant. Tim, thank you. Have a lovely weekend.
And you. Cheers, Brad.
Bye.
Bye.